Hi everyone, welcome to Recitation 7. In this recitation, we would like to talk about event-driven programming. The purpose of this recitation is to practice event-driven programming using JavaScript. Before the recitation, we also need to open the Visual Studio Code. You also need to click the Explorer and to just create a new file. Before this action, you also need to select a folder as your workspace. This process has been talked about many times in the previous recitations. Please select a folder as your working space for Visual Studio Code. Then open the Explorer. Press this button for creating a new file. Please create a new file. We name it as event driven 1 ts.html, event driven 1 ts.html. And also please type exclamation and then press tab. This is our shell HTML file. And we can just change the title of this document as parallax models. This is the goal of this recitation. We would like to use JavaScript and HTML to build up this web application. This application is used for calculating the total sales of Parallax Motors Corporation, and also you can estimate the the expected sales for next year. For example, for the Eastern Division, the sales is $1,000, and for Western Division, it is $2,000. And if you calculate 2019 total, then this text box will present the calculation result. And if you think the estimation for 2020 is higher than that of 2019, you click high, then the expected sales in 2020 will be higher than that of 2019. This is a web application. And in this recitation, I need to introduce the usage of text boxes like this for text boxes, and the buttons like calculate 2019 total, and the higher or lower, which are radio buttons. This is the goal of our recitation 7. Now let's start our programming. First, we need to just add a heading, which is Parallax Models Corporation, right? So it should be H1. And H1 is Parallax Models Corp. Dot. Okay. And the second level heading is sales, and the unit is $1 million. Then H2, press tab, sales dollar millions. This is the second level heading, H2. Then we need a new paragraph, and the first part of the paragraph is just some basic text as Eastern Division, right? Now P to represent for paragraph tag, and the text is Eastern Division. Now I need to introduce how to add a text box to our web application, to our code. The tag for adding a text box is input. You need to just type in input, then press tab. And the type of the input is text. Represent for text box. Then you need the ID. ID is Eastern, and then unchange. We need to just leave the unchanged parameter as blank. We will talk about this part later. Then if you just open our code with lab server, you can see there is a text box right here. Okay, that's coming back. Now we add the second text boxes as the Western division cells, right? So it is P, then Western division, and also input tag. Type is also text. ID equal to Western, and unchanged, leave it as blank. Okay. Now we need to add a new button. The button should be also included within a paragraph. The tag for adding a button is called button. This is a button tag, button, then press tab. For the button, we should give it a name. The text we want to present within the button is calculate 2019 total. Then we need to just write calculate 2019 total. And also, we need some other parameters for this button, like ID. ID represents for the identity parameter. It is very important for every text box, buttons, and radio buttons because later, if we do some programming using JavaScript, we need to present the result within these text boxes. So when you want to just cite or use this text box or buttons, you need their IDs as the identities. The ID for this button, we just name it as total sales. And for the button, there is another parameter called onClick. OnClick button, OnClick parameter, we also leave it as blank. We will talk about the usage of the onClick parameter later. Now save this HTML file, go back to the browser. We can check that the calculate 2019 total button has been presented. Okay, next part, we need to just add another text box, which is 2019 total sales. Then P 2019 total sales. Input, sorry. Then press tab. Input type is text box. ID is sales 2019. Unchanged parameter, leave it as blank. Okay. Next, we need to just add another paragraph. The first text is estimate for 2020, and then it followed by two radio buttons, including some text. Now it is paragraph, and text is estimate just for 2020. Now we need to just talk about the radio buttons. This is called the calculate 2019 total. This is just a normal button, and radio buttons is a rounded button like this, like the high button and lower button. These are called radio buttons. And the method of inserting a radio button into the web application is also we also need to use the input tag, and the type is changed as radio, represent for radio button. Then we need to introduce some new parameters for names. We also have the IDs. The IDs is high, and now we just leave the name parameter as blank. The ID is high. ID is the identity. Every text box, buttons and radio button need an ID. Then on click parameter. For buttons and radio buttons, because these are buttons, we can just click the buttons. So we need the onClick event. And for text boxes, the event is onChange, which means that every time the content within the text box is being changed, then some code in this onChange event will be executed. This is the meaning of onChange and onClick. Okay, we will explain this part detailedly later. The text is high. Then input video ms blank id equal to lower. On click, leave it as blank, and the text is lower. If we want to just as the text after the radio button, you can just write some text after the input tag. Okay. Now we have got two radio buttons, but now there is an issue right here. For our goal, once we click the radio buttons of high, the low will not be checked. Once we click low, the high will not be checked. There are a conflict between the high radio button and the low radio button. But in our code, once we check the high, and also we can check the low. This is a problem, right? How to solve this? Now we need to use the name parameter. The name parameter can be seen as a group for the radio buttons. If the radio buttons has the same name, they are grouped together. Like for this, we can add the same name as estimate. And for the low radio button, the name is also estimate. Now let's go back to the code. Once we check the high, we can now check the low. Once we check the low, we can now check the high. The conflict has been built up. This is the usage of name parameter. And the identity, the parameter of identity and the name for radio buttons are different. As we talked about before, the ID parameter is only the identity for the radio button and buttons and the text boxes. And for each radio buttons and text boxes, their ID should be different between each other. And the name parameter is for grouping the radio buttons to build up the conflict between the group of radio buttons. This is the difference between name parameter and ID parameter. Okay, next part is the last line, which is 2020 expected sales, and also followed by a text box. Then for each line, we just include them within a paragraph, which is a p tag, and 2020 expected sales, and also an input box text box ID equal to we can make the ID equal to sales 2020 and the unchanged event leave it as blank. Okay, Now we have built up a shell file, and we also need to just change the style within the head tag. Style, the first is body, or the parameter is background color. Background color is yellow, right? Yellow. And the second is the p tag. The style for p tag, we make it as font size equal to 20 pixels. This is the setting for the styles of this web application. Now we check our, now we open it with web server. You can see this is the same as our goal. Okay, now we have just built up the GUI, the graphic user interface for this web application, but it can now perform some calculations. Like right here, if we enter 1000 and 2000 right here, we calculate 2019 total. This text box will not present any calculation result. Now we need to use the JavaScript code to do the calculation. Let's come into the second part of this recitation. In the last recitation, I have talked that if you want to add some JavaScript code into the web application, into the HTML file, you need to use this script tag, right? But for this recitation, the place for adding JavaScript code is different. We need to just add the necessary JavaScript code into the quotations of the unchanged parameters or the quotations of the unclick parameters. This is the way of executing the JavaScript code and adding the JavaScript code. Okay, so what we want to do right now is to just perform this function. Once we click the calculate 2019 total, then we will add up the values within the Eastern Division text box and the Western Division text box. We add up the two numbers together and just present the calculation result within the third text box. This is our job. Now we need to just change the onClick parameter of the calculate 2019 total button, right? What we want to do is that once we click this button, this calculate 2019 total button, we will present the calculation result within the third text box. Therefore, we need to just change the onClick parameter of this button. The code is just like this. You can just press enter to leave a new line to our JavaScript code to make it easier to read. For once we have talked about before, we need a new parameter, right? A new parameter, we make it as total 2019. And this new variable should equal to the value within the first text box and plus the value within the second text box. Now the problem comes how we can get the values within this text box. We need to use the first we need to just get the identity of the first text box. It is Eastern. This is the identity. Then we need to just write dot value. Then we have got the value for Eastern Division text box. Then we plus the second text box. It is Western dot value. This is the identity of this text box you want to get the value from. Then you can use the dot value method to get the value within this text box. And now we have calculated the result. The result is the variable total 2019. Now we want to write this variable into our third text box. The identity is sales 2019. Now we just get the sales 2019 dot value equal to total 2019. The line of 2021, this line of code means that we want to assign the variable, which is the calculation result, to the third text box. The identity is sales 2019. Now let's open with live server to test the function, like 1, like 2, 1 for Eastern Division and 2 for Western Division, and calculate 2019 total. Now there comes the problem. It is not a numerical calculation, right? It is just the text plus. We can think that this is the text as 1, and the second box, it is the text of 2, and we add up the text of 1 and text of 2 together. The text will be 1, 2. It is not a numerical calculation, right? How we solve this problem? We need to just add a number command. This number will just get the value from the Eastern text box and then transfer the data type of text into a number, rather than just the text. Now, if we open with the live server to do a test, we can see the calculation result is correct. So every time if you want to just get the calculation result from a text box, if the data type of this text box is number, then you need to use the number function or number command to transfer the data type. And also, during my recitation, during my teaching of previous semesters, all of you will be faced with a problem, which will lead to the corruption of the whole code, which is that sometimes you will know that the identity between different buttons and text boxes should be different, but you should also know the variable name should also be different from the identities of the text boxes and the buttons. Like now, if we change the variable name of total 2019 to the identity of the text box as sales 2019, and we change this to sales 2019. Now we open with live server, we do a test. The whole code will corrupt, will fail. You need to be very careful about this. All the variable name should be different from the identities of text boxes and buttons. And the identities of the text boxes and the buttons should be different from each other. And the name for the variables should be different from each other. Do you understand? Okay, let's change it back to the correct format. Now let's come to the second subpart of the JavaScript code. What we want to do is once we have calculated the total sales for 2019 year, then once we click the radio buttons of high, then the estimation or expected sales for the next year is 20% more than that of 2019. Once we click low, and then the estimated increase rate is just a 10%. Then brings the expected sales into $3,300 million. Okay, now we need to just change the on-click event of the radio button for high and the radio button for low. Now we first change the on-click event of the radio button for high. First, we need a variable, right? This variable, it is increase rate. We make it as for the high radio button, the increase rate is 30%. Now we can just calculate the result, which is another variable. This variable is total 2020 equal to, we get the value from the third text box, which is sales 2019 dot value, right? Sales 2019 dot value. This is the value we have calculated and then present within the third paradox or the third text box. Then it should be times 1 plus increase rate, right? Then we want to just present this value within the last text box, which is sales 2020 equal value equal to total 2020. And we can just rounding this number. We can use the dot to fixed method to just this is the introduction to this method, which is the number of digits after the decimal point, and we can just save it to the 10th digits. Okay. And don't forget the semicolon after each line of JavaScript code. Then we can just open with LiveServer to do a test. 1000 and 2000. Calculate 3000 and click high. Then the expected sales is 30% larger than that of 2019. Then we can copy this segment of code. For the low, since it's the same, only the increase rate has been changed as 10%. Okay, open with LiveServer. It is the completed web application. It is 3000, and click high it is 3900, and click low it is 300. This is all for this web application. Let's do a summary. Okay. For this recitation, the first part is how you add a text box and the buttons and radio buttons into the web application. If you are not familiar with this, you can also use the W3 schools to learn this. We have talked about this learning resource, right? You can get the usage, the detailed usage of input tag and button tag. This is the first part, and the second part, we have talked about how to just add the necessary clicking event and the on-change event into the buttons and text boxes. Okay, this is all for our Recitation 7. Don't forget to submit your attendance record. Bye.